Hi everyone, welcome to this WSET webinar on Champagne Rosé, maceration and blending techniques. We'll just give it a few minutes while we wait for everybody to join us. While we do, feel free to go and grab yourself a glass of bubbles, as it is Champagne Day after all. And it'd be great if you could let us know in the chat section where in the world you're joining us from. I am in London in the UK. For those who aren't familiar with WSET, we are the world's leading provider of qualifications and courses in wine, spirits, and sake. You can study our qualifications in over 70 different countries through our network of over 800 course providers and in 15 different languages. So if you're interested in finding out more about our WSET courses, just head to wsetglobal.com and you can find your nearest course provider there. I am Rachel. I'm marketing manager at WSET School London, which is WSET's flagship course provider based in London. I am also a diploma student, but I've recently passed the sparkling wines module, so I'm happy to be joining this more as a champagne enthusiast than a student right now. So just a few housekeeping points before we hand over to our speakers, but please note that this will be recorded and available to watch on the WSET Global Events Hub on YouTube after the session. Please do post your questions in the Q&A box as well, and we'll try to cover as many of these as possible towards the end of the session. I think we've got about 10 minutes to do that. And finally, this session is being run in collaboration with our partner, Comité Champagne, in celebration of Global Champagne Day, and is going to be chaired by Philippe Fibrot. Philippe is Head of Public Relations for Comité Champagne, which is the joint trade association that represents the interests of independent champagne producers and champagne houses. And Philippe has worked in England for 14 years as a PR and events manager in London and Canterbury before going back to his home country in 1999 and has a master's degree in media studies. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to Philippe, who will introduce the session and our other speakers as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Rachel. I would like to thank also the WSET events team in London for their help coordinating this webinar. We are delighted to be with you, and we are particularly privileged also to have joining us today Charline Drapier from Champagne Drapier and Frédéric Panayotis, cellar master of Champagne Ruinart. So they will take us through all of the technical aspects about Champagne Rosé in a few minutes' time. I believe we have participants from over 86 different countries today, so we are incredibly lucky to have you here. I think it's only 4 p.m. here in Champagne, 3 p.m. in London, midnight in Sydney, 10 a.m. in New York. Well, any time is quite a good time for champagne on Champagne Day. So let's go for it. Now, okay, let's see if we can make it work. Suivante. We're going to talk, I'm just going to give you an overall picture of our region. We're going to talk about the geographical location, just for you who haven't been to visit us yet. You will see exactly where we are. I have a few key figures for you. I will go into a short history about Rosé Champagne, and then we will have our two champagne producers, to talk about the two different techniques for the making of Rosé Champagne. And before we go on to that, I have one question for you. And if you could say just in one word, and if you put it in a chat box, for you, what does champagne mean to you? What does it mean, champagne, for you? Okay. If I can have some feedback also about some of the answers, I would be quite happy. Rachel, if you can just say it loud, I would be great.
No problem. We've got loads of answers coming in.
I can see, yes, roughly, yes.
Celebration, elegance, sparkling, sharing joy, life, delight, indulgence.
Absolutely. I mean, it's all there indeed. And of course, you can't celebrate no event without champagne. And celebration is really a part of what champagne is all about. But of course, not only. We are talking about terroir. We are talking about authenticity. We are talking about wine. We are talking about heritage, history. All that is part of what protected designation, of course, of origin is all about. And you can't, an appellation d'origine contrôlée is based on historical criteria, legal aspect, and consistency. And so champagne, what is champagne? I have the slides? Well, it's just coming up here on the northeast of France, just a few kilometers east of Paris. Champagne has a production area of 34,000 hectares with 4 main regions, shall we say, Montagne de Reims, Vallée de la Marne, Côte des Blancs, and Côte des Bar. I will go very quickly onto all these figures because, of course, you will be able to see all that back onto the replay. The 3 main grape varieties in our region, you know them, and they are Pinot Noir, 38% of our vineyards planted with Pinot Noir, 31% planted with Meunier, and the 3rd main grape variety being Chardonnay, planted at 31% in the vineyards of Champagne. But as you probably know, because you are advanced level, we have 4 other grape varieties, but anecdotic, shall we say, we have 144 hectares planted with Pinot Blanc, Pinot Gris, Arban, and Petit Meunier. It's 0.3% of the vineyard of Champagne, so it's not much of these 4 grape varieties. So 34,000 hectares, we have 319 wine-producing villages around these 34,000 hectares, 16,000 growers, 130 cooperatives, and 370 champagne houses. Perhaps just a brief word about the 2 families working in Champagne, grower producers. They own almost the entire vineyard. 90% of the land belong to grower producers. And Champagne houses, on the other hand, are responsible for 2/3 of the production of Champagne, and they make roughly 90% of all exports. So we have that specificity in our region of balance between the raw material and the market. And when you know this, you understand that they need to talk to each other on a regular basis. And this is what they do at the Comité Champagne. Champagne is a very small vineyard. It's a mere pinprick on the world map. It's 0.5% of the vineyards in the world. We shipped last year 325.5 million bottles, of which 57 of them were exported. Our top markets are USA, UK, Japan, Germany, Italy, Australia, Belgium, Switzerland, Spain, Sweden, Canada, Netherlands, South Korea, Mexico, and Denmark. These are top 15 markets. We export to over 190 different countries. Our shipments outside the European Union have doubled in 20 years, and we have over 38 markets with more than 500,000 bottles shipped there. What about Rosé Champagne? In volume, Rosé Champagne make 10.6% of all champagne exported today. Outside, of course, of the first champagne are what we call non-vintage. Perhaps we should call them multi-vintage. Our top countries for getting Rosé Champagne, you see the double figures for the USA, United Kingdom, Germany, Switzerland, Spain, and Canada there. That was for last year. So all these figures, of course, you can find them all on our website on champagne.com. So you are most welcome to come and visit our website. Now, a brief history about Rosé Champagne. In fact, how did Rosé Champagne come about? Perhaps, we should say that Rosé Champagne is rosé from birth, long before being white and sparkling, as the wine of Champagne was still rosé or red wine. In fact, it appeared in 1814 as a sparkling rosé wine, vin rosé moussé, on the wine list of a famous Parisian restaurant. And these rosé, in fact, were obtained by the maceration techniques, as it were. When we look back in 1764, in fact, it was already appearing on the shipping bulletin of Champagne Ruinart wine list. In 1820, this is the first time when we talk about blended rosé champagne. This is when it appeared. That is to say, white wine to which red wine from Champagne was added to obtain a pink color. At the time when production was not regulated, some used what we call the tint of Fim, which was made from elderberry and whose color was sufficient to tint the wine. And that particular technique, of course, was forbidden in 1907. And now, today, I mean, at the end of the 19th century, it enjoyed a certain success, followed by a long eclipse up to the 1970s, when it made a notable comeback, then faded away again. And really since the beginning of the year 2000, it has enjoyed quite a growing success around the world. The two methods of obtaining the pink color today are, of course, vinification of must into rosé and blending. And this last method strictly regulated since 1938. And this is, of course, the most widespread technique. So perhaps you could say that just like white wine is not wine, rosé champagne is not really pink. We talk about gray, partridge eye, claret, bluish, coppery, so many tones really to evoke the color of this quality of champagne, born most of the time from the delicate union of red wine and white wine. But rosé champagne is first and foremost the expression of a style and the construction of a wine. So the two ways of making rosé, as you know, are the theme of today, maceration and blending techniques. The first way is blended rosé. This technique is exclusive to champagne. In fact, it is obtained by blending white wine with 2 to 20% of red wines. That's generally in champagne, depending on the choice, of course, of the winemaker. And the second production method is maceration rosé, which is obtained by leaving the juice of black grapes macerate with their skins. If the entire maceration tank is intended to make rosé wine, it is a maceration rosé. If only part of the juice is extracted from the vat to make rosé, around 10 to 15% generally, and the rest of the must is left to continue maceration for longer, then the term rosé de saignée can be used. This is the only difference between the two terms. And these particulars, by the way, are not regulated by the specification of the Champagne appellation. But now, without further ado, let's hear it from our two champagne producers. And we are joined again by Charline from Champagne Rosé and Frédéric from Champagne Ruinart. And we're going to start with Frédéric, who is going to take us through and talk about the expression of the style of Ruinart Rosé Champagne. Over to you, Frédéric.
Thank you, Philippe, and hello to everyone. It's quite amazing to see that you are all around the world. A particular thank you to fellows from Greece that I saw saying goodbye from, was saying hello from Athens. Yes, the idea here from my side is to tell you a little bit about the making of the blended rosé technique, which, as Philippe said, originate from the early 1800s. Maybe we can move to the next slide since I'm not in charge of that. Thank you. So, no, previous. Thank you. The one thing with rosé, it is the only region in France where this is actually allowed as part of an appellation. All other regions of France need to do a maceration technique or a saignée technique. So that's quite, due to the historical know-how and experience that we developed in Champagne. The second thing I want to know about this technique in general, before we are going a little bit into more details, is that whenever you make rosé by not using the blending technique, you need to use mostly either Pinot Noir or Meunier. I mean, you can macerate a bit of Chardonnay with black grapes, but not too much, because otherwise the result will be probably not so interesting in terms of color. So if you want to introduce a fair amount of Chardonnay into your blend, the blending technique is the only one. Okay, so that's quite important to have in mind. And as an example, at Ruinart, we love Chardonnay. And so it's kind of natural to us to use this blending technique, because some of our rosé contain up to 85 or even 90% of Chardonnay. All right, but I'm sure Charline will show the other side of the maceration technique, where you can use easily 100% Pinot Noir or Meunier or a blend of both varieties. So when it comes to when it comes to making rosé, and we can move on to the next slide, because I think you have to take into account the whole process. And obviously, everything starts in the vineyard. You know, this is something that we should never forget when we make rosé, and particularly for the blending technique. Crafting excellent red wines is probably less and less of a challenge with climate change. But believe me, for many years until recently, making a good red wine was not easy in Champagne. And so sourcing the right grapes was a key element in the process. And when I mean sorting the grapes that are good enough for red wines, it also means some of the cru of Champagnes are really known to provide better, I would say, better Pinot Noir for still wines or for red wines than other ones. So you see on the above pictures from left to right, 3 of the most famous vineyards, Ailly, then Bouzy in the middle, and the last one, Charline, is kind of for you. This is l'Hérissé, a fantastic Pinot Noir terroir from the Haut. Not only the selection of vineyard is important, but I would say also how you tend those vines. And as I will speak for what we do at Ruinart, the process starts in the vineyard by selecting also the clones or the massal selection, having a lower yield. In a way, we do everything to maximize the amount of phenolic material in order to have, you know, a good expression of the color. I mean, a good extraction of the color. As you can see, we love those tiny berries. So milrandage is not an issue when it comes to Pinot Noir or Meunier, I would say, but I'm more familiar with Pinot Noir for red wine. The other element in the process that is absolutely key, but that's true for any prestigious red wine, is the sorting, and sorting needs to be carried out in the vineyards. And obviously, having a manual harvest, this can be done. It should be done more easily. I think we can still make progress, and 2023 was a good example of what Champagne can do and what Champagne could do in some instances. But sorting needs to be done also typically at the winery on a sorting table, as you can see on the right. This is one of this is the facility where we process the red wine. This is actually from 2023. You know, even in a year which was not so easy, we managed to bring in some beautiful Pinot Noir grapes for the red wine used for the potentially for Don Ruinart. Then I would say there are processes or steps as you would have for making red wine, like you would, you know, like a regular red wine. So typically the grapes will be destemmed and crushed. You know, you can, I mean, destemming is not necessary, but knowing that in Champagne we typically achieve, I would say, not so high level of ripeness. Whole clusters is not yet developed. It might be for Coteaux Champenois, the still wines, the still red wines, but I would say for red wine that are used to make the rosé, I don't know of anybody who is doing it. And then how do you extract the color? 2 ways, what we call remontage, so pumping over. You know, you once the mark thing on the surface, then you need to pump the juice from the bottom, put it back. Divide that you see in the middle of the lower pictures, that, you know, allows you to, in a way, lessivate the skins in order to extract the color. That's not what we do at Ruinart. We think pumping over extracts a little bit too much, especially tannins, and so we minimize pumping over. We prefer pigeage, which is so punching down, as you can see on the next picture on the lower right. That, in my opinion, allows for a much gentle extraction. But anyhow, and as you will see with the techniques of blending later on, you pretty much can do everything. If you do 5 pumping over a day, or if you do if you do 20 punch down, you're going to extract a lot. But if you moderate them, in both cases, you're going to extract not so much. So it's really up to the know-how, but also up to the style that you want to achieve, that you adjust the extraction technique. Obviously, not forgetting the vintage, because not one vintage is alike. And in some vintages, it might be easier to extract the color. And in others, you might be more cautious because you might extract some green flavors, depending on the ripeness level. So it's all, in a way, to the sensitivity of the winemaking team. One last aspect which might definitely also change the style is how you, in which kind of a container you ferment the red wines. I mean the red grapes. As you can see here, this is like a large oak cask, but we do use stainless steel at Ruinart because we prefer the neutrality of stainless steel. But again, there, to each his own. You know, I mean, the world is your oysters. You can use many different devices, but the result might be different. Now, to be more precise about what we're looking for, and then I want to switch to the next slide, because it's more personal, what I want to share with you. Next slide, please. Whoever is in charge, please press the finger. Thank you so much. I think one of the key elements, which sometimes is forgotten by producers in Champagne, is that, in my opinion, when we make red wine for rosé, we don't make red wine as a red wine. Meaning, this red wine will not be bottled on its own and drunk on its own. If you make red wine as a red wine, then it's a different story, because you will extract more, you will go further. And I think it can be a mistake, again, depending on your style, but at Ruinart, it would be a mistake to try to extract too many tannins, too much structure, because this will definitely impact, or would definitely impact, the style of the rosé champagne afterwards. And it's very important because it's a different mindset. And I've talked to people around me, and I've seen people going back and now doing this, like having really rosé in mind and not red wine in mind. And it's probably a critical step in the making of the optimum red wine for rosé. Can you push on the slide, because there is a little thingy that I wanted to show about how color and tannins are extracted. So this is a little figure that shows you what happens over time during the maceration process when you macerate black grapes and you extract the phenolics by either pumping over or punching down. At the beginning, in the very first few days, the alcohol level is close to zero. Fermentation has not started yet. It takes 2, 3, 4, 5 days to reach a level of alcohol. So at the beginning, you only extract the tinier phenolics, which is typically anthocyanins. And those compounds are water soluble. Okay, so that makes a lot of sense. If you wait too long, let's say over 15 days, it is well known that these anthocyanins, so the bright color in a way, will go down in concentration because it combines with stems, etc. So you will lose them. On another hand, since the alcohol is rising, then one more button, what you extract after, let's say, 10 days, 12 days, is the tannins that are soluble in alcohol. So the amount of time where you macerate is obviously critical. If you make red wine, there's no issue going, 2 weeks, 20 days, 30 days, even more if you want, because you're going to extract the tannins, which is what you want. But I think that if you want to make a red wine that is more suitable to be blended for rosé champagne, the ideal time would be between 6 and maybe 10 days. Okay, and that's enough to extract anthocyanins, and not enough to extract tannins. Okay, well, that's the way we work at Ruinart. And I would tell you something else. We tend to have a shorter maceration for non-vintage and a slightly longer maceration, about 6-7 days, and a slightly longer maceration for the potentially, red wine used for, let's say, Don Ruinart. And that those 3-4 days makes a huge difference in the structure of the wine. You know, for the non-vintage, we definitely want to have as little tannins as possible. For the Don Ruinart, which is going to age for 10, 12, 15 years and more, having some tannins at the beginning of its life is probably also helping and a guarantee and will help for aging and fight against oxygen and so the effect of time in the bottle. Okay, so not only you need to adjust how you make the red wine versus, you know, as a rosé and not for red wine, but you can also adjust how and fine tune, I would say, how long you're going to have your maceration to make a red wine more suitable for non-vintage versus vintage. Now, we can move to something else because I have a question for you, and don't push it yet. Maybe you can answer in the discussion. What is the typical word, the most common word used to describe the color of rosé champagne? Come on, guys. I'm sure you have. You can say in your, okay, salmon, pink, salmon, salmon, salmon. Very good. So button, because I'm a geek and I wanted to understand what pink salmon is like. So pink salmon, we all agree with that. Now let's go one more step. And we should remove. But anyway, so pink salmon has all kinds of colors. It can be, I like the blush. Depends how deep you blush or not, actually. But what I mean by that is that pink salmon, as much as it's a convenient descriptor to use with customers, with people around you. As a winemaker, if I would tell my team, guys, this year, remember, our rosé needs to be pink salmon, it would be a big mess because everyone has a different opinion of what a pink salmon color is like. You know, if you are raised in Finland, it looks more like on the upper left, but if you're raised in Alaska on the Copper River, the salmon is almost like tuna. So this way of describing the color doesn't work for us. And let's move to the next slide. I want to Œil de Perdrix, same thing. You know, where in a pot. But the way we measure the color is by a technique called spectrophotometry, and we measure two things: what we call the color intensity and the hue. I won't go into details because it would take too long. But having said that, we can put the typical color that we have at the beginning for, let's say, rosé non-vintage versus Don Ruinart, and whoever was in charge of the button was too fast. If you can go back a little bit, yes, thank you. You see, for our non-vintage, and it's true for us, and it's true for anybody else. When we make the blend, this is the point at the beginning. The color we have at the beginning is not the color we're going to have after, let's say, 2 or 3 years of aging. And that's why you need to realize that we need to measure the color at the beginning in order to know what the color will be like after 2 or 3 years of aging. This is our experience. And so we know when we create the blend that the color should be around that hue, around that intensity, in order to get the color that is expected for the non-vintage Ruinart. And it's quite important because I think for non-vintage, especially for a house, customers expect a certain type of color. You know, let's say Bilcar Salmon is known for its kind of light peach color, and it's beautiful and it's very successful. When, let's say, a Piper Heidsieck Rosé Sauvage is much darker. And I think the people who buy this wine, they also buy it for this. So every house has a style of color, and although there can be some variation, it's important to be quite stable. Now, for Don Ruinart, and you can push the button, whoever is in charge. For Don Ruinart, it's a bit different. First, the aging is much longer. So at the end, the color will be more with this orange hue, which is typical of an older rosé. And from one vintage to another, push the button, I don't mind having variations. You know, let's say 09 will be more, will be darker than, let's say, 04. And this color will also change once the wine has been disgorged, because those vintage champagne have a lot more potential for aging. So this was to illustrate that color is an important element. We need to understand it. We need to measure it in order to be able to, I wouldn't say fully control it, but have a good control on what can be expected at the end of the aging process. Voila. But of course, the main thing when we create the blend is the smell and the taste. Voila. I think that's my part, crafting blended rosé, and I will let Charline take over to tell us the secret about maceration and rosé saigné. Thank you.
Thank you, Frédéric.
Thank you, Frédéric. That's very interesting. Don't think I ever got that deep into blended rosé, because our specialty at Drapier is making maceration, or better said, saigné rosé. Well, anyway, bonjour everyone. Thank you for joining us today. It really is a pleasure to talk a little bit more about saigné rosé. As you may know, it is not a widely used method to make rosé champagne. And there's absolutely no judgment one way or another. It's just two sides of champagne, and this is what's lovely about the Champagne region. Just as many terroirs and as many methods, and it just shows the diversity and what our terroir can say. And for those of you who may know Drapier from before, we are located in the southern part of Champagne, in the Aube, very close to l'Hérissé, so one of the pictures that Frédéric showed earlier. And as the southernmost region, or better said, sub-region of Champagne, we have a specialty of Pinot Noir driven champagne. So this is a very important geographical and historical point, because it leads you to, and leads us to, why we make saigné champagne and not blending champagne. So just to give you an idea, among the now 70 hectares that we own, 70% of it is farmed of Pinot Noir. So very, very heavy of Pinot Noir, and even a lot of our champagnes are made 100% Pinot Noir. So it's just also great to see that during this presentation, you have one Chardonnay-driven house and one Pinot Noir-driven house. So here in this slide, my slide is much more simple than Frédéric's, but it just shows you 3 things that are important for us to make our saigné champagne. First is the Pinot Noir, because all our rosé champagne are made of Pinot Noir. Here you have a very healthy grape of Pinot Noir, because it's extremely important to have a healthy grape. And this is just as important to make a red wine, which is going to be a basis to produce a blended champagne, but also as a saigné method, because the contamination on red wine can go very, very quickly. So you really want to have very healthy grapes, and also to have a very short distance between the vineyard and the press, in order to avoid any degradation of the state of the bunch. So we usually, even if our vineyards are spread across a small area, we try to have our Pinot Noir that have a face to become a rosé as close as possible from our press, and also to shorten the time it comes from the picking date to the maceration phase. Of course, you cannot skip the sorting table. Extremely important, because otherwise the mold is going to spread during the fermentation for a much longer time that it would during the pressing time. So sorting table, and then it goes into the tank. special tank, it has this shape here because it has a conic sort of end. And it's going to last a couple of hours. It has a very, it varies from one year to another because of the concentration, because of the climate conditions of a specific year. So at Drapier, we have to, well, most rosé de Saignée producers have to check that every hour. So we taste the wine every hour to see at what stage of color they are, what intensity they have. And we do have a big variation of color from one year to another. It is one of the beauty of the Rosé de Saignée, and it's also one of the drawbacks, because when you expect a little bit more consistency on color, you might not necessarily find it, especially when you are when you have a big proportion of a specific year. And this is, I'm just extending a little bit more because I know most of you are very already have a good idea of what rosé, Champagne Rosé is, but to get into the details, it's also harder to keep Réserve Rosé de Saignée because it holds time a little less than a white reserve wine. So we usually have a big proportion of our base wine in a Rosé de Saignée. So it does give us a little less leeway in terms of blending, because we do blend Rosé de Saignée, but a little less than we would blend any typical white wine, just because after a year in a tank, it would start to fade a little bit more. So anyway, it stays in this tank for a certain amount of time that would vary. And before it is completely cleared out, and this is what Philippe has distinguished between a saignée and a maceration, we bleed the tank with a proportion of the coloring pigment, actually, what is right below the must cap. And this would be, that would generally be 10% of that tank. And then we would leave the wine in the tank for another 10, 15 hours. But again, it can vary a lot from one year to another. Then it goes back into the press and it comes as a tainted grape juice, just as easy as that. And obviously the color is dark, and color of Pinot Noir, even if it's made to be a white wine, is already quite dark when it comes out of the press, but it's much darker when you want to make a Rosé de Saignée. So all of these Rosé de Saignées are only Pinot Noir, at least at Drapier. We only produce Pinot Noir because we only have 5% of Meunier. And I wouldn't be the best speaker to talk about Meunier Rosé de Saignée. We know Pinot Noir better. So we do embrace all of the identity, the specificities of Rosé de Saignée, meaning that it's going to be heavier on color, no doubt. It is going to have higher tannins, interesting, but really it's important to balance the tannins out, which is why we have to be very, very mindful of the length of the maceration. So what Frederic said about red wine, making red wine is pretty much the same when you make a saignée, except that you don't count in days, you count in hours. It's also going to be a little bit more intense, as the final product is going to be more intense, probably in berry flavor, in like very simple bunch of like strawberry, raspberry aromas, and the non-vintage, especially the non-vintage, like all of those primary aromas that are just exploding and are very intense and that you can usually feel even on the nose. So it is going to be more of a vinous wine. And at Drapier, the way we counterbalance that in order to have not a super heavy type of champagne is to level down the dosage. That would be another topic of a WSET seminar, so I'm not going to focus too much on dosage, but generally speaking, we have very low dosage or brut nature, and our rosés are no exception, meaning that our highest dosed champagne would be 6 grams. And you can tell then on a 6-gram Rosé de Saignée, your palate is going to feel that it's actually probably much more. And this is just a perception, just because you have this bowl of red fruit that is exploding in your mouth and your brain connects and links that to a high level of sugar. And the other expression of Rosé de Saignée that we make is 0 dosage. And this is going to focus a little bit more on grapefruit, pomelos, and maybe rosé. I can't remember what that is in English, but a little bit more acidity, still red fruit flavors, but a bit more on the acidity notes. So these are the general aspects of Rosé de Saignée. Probably if you talk to another speaker, he would give you another vision. This is our vision at Drapier. I also put another picture here on the previous, sorry, it was a Réserve Perpétuelle, but I'll go back to that with the range of champagne we make, sorry. But yeah, the next picture is it was just a funny picture of us blending the rosé. You can see here, I know it's a bit blur, but this is pretty much the first bottle that you see is a Pinot Noir base wine, and this gives you an idea of the color it has when we start blending our vin clair. And this is just my daughter taking part of the process. She didn't want to miss that. As I said, we do have a little bit of action in terms of blending because we are able to vinify separately our different parcels of rosé. However, we tend to have one single terroir that is making our Rosé de Saignée, and this is Urville. This is Kimmergen limestone facing south, so we have quite a lot of sun, and we don't have so much of a difference in terms of terroir when it comes to sourcing our grapes of our Rosé de Saignée. So it's more an expression of the Pinot Noir with maceration on one terroir. And then on the next slide, you will see that we have extended our family of Rosé de Saignée. So there is just not one way of making a Rosé de Saignée. There is a couple of ways, and we actually started to make whole bunch maceration. We talked about, Frédéric was asking that he didn't know of any producers who's just been experimenting with that. We have just started experimenting with that. Actually, the second bottle on your left is coming from L'Hérissé. And L'Hérissé is a terroir and is a specific AOC where they produce red wine, rosé, still rosé from whole bunch maceration. And we have been sourcing some of our grapes from L'Hérissé. And 5 years ago, we bought a parcel in L'Hérissé. And just because I think we wanted to have fun and just to see what would be the effect of champagniser a Rosé de Saignée, we did that. Before it was a Pinot Noir that went into our Brut Nature, so the one that's on the left. But because it was so different, we decided to release it as a separate cuvée. Why? I'll tell you why. So the Saignée Brut Nature is super open and crispy and has a pomelo and even like the salinity. So you're looking for contrast between the density and the intensity of the Saignée, but also the fact that it's saline because of the Kimmergen limestone and the no dosage, etc. Now, when you talk about whole bunch, you're going to extract a little bit of the tannins that are coming from a very northern part. So this is the challenge. And if you were to compare it with another wine region, a lot of people would say maybe you have some notes that remind you of Irancy, which is very north, and you have a little bit of that cherry notes, a little bit of the milky lactic notes. So this is quite unusual. And if you taste a rosé from L'Hérissé or a Champagne Rosé that is made on whole bunch, you might not clearly, you'll be a bit surprised, but we just thought it might be interesting to see, to see how it turned out. And we thought it was very interesting because it has this more wintry, concentrated red wine, very much like a red wine note, especially provided that a réserve perpétuelle of 40% gets into that blend. So we do want that concentration. And one of the previous slides showed a réserve perpétuelle in oak of whole bunch maceration rosé from l'Hérissé. So you do have a little bit of a mix of aged maceration and oak, which is not showing so much because it's a réserve perpétuelle. And it's just an unusual thing to do. So we just released a couple of thousands of these and we have fun with that. And the third bottle on that slide is showing our regular Rosé de Saignée, which has 6 grams of dosage, and it might appear completely differently to your palate. That's the one I was telling you about. And the vintage rosé. I can totally relate also with what Frédéric said about how you would vinify differently something that is destined to be a vintage and something that is not going to be a vintage, because we found out that pure Saignée rosé was not doing so well in aging. It's like, for us, it's a reality. Like the heaviness does become a drawback over time because you lack acidity, you lack finesse, especially when you're talking about usually an aging that is over 10 years. For our Grand Cendré, we usually release it 10 years after the harvest. However, we thought it was interesting to combine the Saignée with an addition of Chardonnays. 80% Saignée on Pinot Noir, and an addition of 20% of Chardonnay that would completely transform the profile of the champagne when it's being released. And the color is very different. You can also play on that because the color is changing a lot more when you do age, as the color chart was showing. And it's interesting. Sorry, I'm changing subject, but I just saw a question here. Said I think I might not have the answer. I'm just going to give you one of the answers. Why is the maceration technique not so frequent in Champagne? I think Philippe would probably explain why the blended technique is allowed in Champagne only, but I would focus only on the second part. I think it's very complex to answer. Maybe the color, the intensity of the color was causing problems during many decades, meaning that when a customer would expect a rosé champagne, he would not expect a very high intensity champagne color. There was some cultural, vision about a quite dark rosé. Sometimes they were linking a dark rosé to maybe a sweet rosé. So that's still something that I hear when I talk about and I'm doing tastings, like, oh, your rosé is quite dark. Is it going to be sweeter? No, it's not going to be sweeter. So that might be one of the answers. And then, yeah, there's many. I think maybe, Philippe, you have different figures, but I remember that Rosé de Saignée is what, 3, 4, 5% of the total production or higher?
Yes. Yeah, no, we're talking about, yes, not more than 4%. Absolutely. Yeah. That's right.
Mic is on, right, for me?
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yep. Okay, I'm asking the people around me to help me put the questions. I've seen a few questions that I can try to answer. If Charlene, you're done with your beautiful, amazing 4 rosé, that's beautiful. I want to try this whole bunch maceration. You got me curious. I hope to see you at the Grand Tasting in Paris.
Yeah, I'll bring one bottle for you.
Right, please. Est-ce que je peux voir les Q&A là parce que je les vois pas? Okay, so one thing, blending technique allowed in Champagne only, that's historical. You know, actually, when in the EU regulations was started to be written in the 70s, the people in Brussels started to say, okay, in Champagne, rosé is going to be made by the maceration technique. And so we said, no, 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 and because it's historically, and they say, prove it. And actually, Veuve Clicquot provided the archives to the people in Brussels to show that it was what we call an us et coutume, like an old tradition. And we were allowed to use this technique in Champagne, and we're the only region to be allowed so far. Maximilien, during the aging process, yes, the color always goes paler. It's easy. Oxygen reacts over time. It combines the phenolics. So they do combine, and it not only gets paler, but it gets more orange. Another thing is, not to be forgotten, that the yeast, the skin of the yeast cells do combine color quite quickly if you and more intensity. When you disgorge the disgorgement part, the deposit is much darker than the wine. It's actually quite purple when the wine is young, and still intense later on. Is whole bunch pressing compulsory in Champagne AOC? No, there is an exception for any red wine. You know, there's kind of a blurry thingy about the Champagne appellation, because red wine in Champagne is not strictly written down, and so it's okay. It's not exactly written in the AOC regulation, but we can process red grapes, not white. So don't expect any orange champagne yet. But we can crush red wines in order to extract the color, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to do so. So whole bunch is not compulsory just for that, but it's kind of an exception. Charlene, I don't know if you will disagree with me, but for me, and as Philippe was writing, there's a slight difference between rosé de saignée and rosé de macération. And I think there is a very, very small quantity of rosé de saignée. I mean, there's already quite a smaller amount of rosé de macération being made. But when you do the saignée, you bleed the tank, you remove some part of the tank, and you only, as you say, 10, 15%. And that would be the strict rosé de saignée as it is, made in other regions. In all the other regions, if you do the saignée, it's because you don't have enough concentration of color in your red wine. And the purpose of making saignée is not to make rosé. The purpose is to make red wine. So it's totally different. And rosé de saignée is kind of a byproduct. It's not the main thing you want to do. Otherwise, this is maceration. So that's for me the different technique. And then you can blend them together. But 100% rosé de saignée, that's extremely rare. Orange champagne, no, that wouldn't be interesting. It's not so good. What else do we have? What do we do with the rest of the red wine after the? Can I go down a little bit for Mark after the? I don't know. There's nothing left. So I don't see the other question for blended rosé. What's the common amount? Okay. So another thing about which was said about the difference of intensity. Why typically maceration or saignée have a darker color? One of the reasons is it's mostly, if not only, black grapes. And of course, that makes a huge difference. They tend to be more vinous. But then, if you would macerate for 1 hour, you would have one of the palest rosé ever. On another hand, if you would do a blended rosé with 25% red wine, your wine would be, like almost like red. So, as a general rule, yes, maceration rosé are a bit darker but that's part of the process. That's part of the content of black grapes, and typically the length of as Charlene said, the length of the maceration. And you can go, but I would say that quite often people go a little bit more to get the fruit because that's the interest of it. But in maceration you can do super pale if you do 5%. And believe me, I know some champagne producers. You have to look at the if it's to see if it's a blanc de noir or a rosé, because you're not sure. And for them, they are nearly red. They're not like sparkling Shiraz, but they're quite red. They're quite dark. So anything is possible. And if you do a blind tasting of rosé champagne, you should be very humble in trying to recognize which is maceration and which is blended. You know, I would never bet any money on it myself. Grand tasting in Paris is first weekend of December, and you should come. It's such a good event. Drapier is there. Lots of producers. We are there, obviously, Renard, and there's a lot of amazing producers from all over France and Italy, and it's really good. Blanc de Noir is white. Blanc is white and Noir is black, so white one from black grapes. In Franciacorta, you should ask people in Franciacorta. But yes, in Italy, it's not like France. So they do whatever. Isn't the blending technique also allowed in Slovenia? Charlene, can you answer that question?
What
Is
is
the
it?
blending technique also allowed in Slovenia? In Zvišek from Dolenjska region.
I will let Philippe answer that question.
Yeah, he's teasing us. He's
We
teasing
do
us.
love Slovenia.
Okay.
But yes, I mean, Frederic was quite right to talk about historical aspect. And, you know, we talked about protected designation of origin being based on historical criteria, legal aspect, and consistency. And it all because of all this historical way of doing things in Champagne, approved by then the various legislation that we are allowed to make this particular rosé by the blending method. There was a question also about matching cheese with rosé. So, I mean, again, I mean, Champagne can be a great match to various different cheeses. And again, depending on the power of your rosé, you will match it with different cheeses. Perhaps, I would say perhaps goat cheese might go well with some rosé de macération to soften perhaps some of the acidity of, you know, the creaminess. Otherwise, you can go into perhaps much stronger type of cheeses like Maroilles from the north of France, for instance. That also perhaps could be a good match. The best thing is really to try out Gouda with cumin, perhaps that type of cheeses.
This can be good, like cheddar, old cheddar with old rosé, like all the prestige, not Comté, but like those orange cheese can be quite good.
That's right.
I see a
Yeah,
question
I
about.
wouldn't say it's easy on a very deep maceration non-vintage. I love champagne and cheese, but I wouldn't say it's the most obvious for a maceration non-vintage. Maybe go for like a soft cheese with Baie Rose, as some of them have like that spiciness to it. But yeah, sorry to interrupt.
No, good. Co-fermentation, you mean, I guess you mean by using black grapes, let's say Pinot Noir and Chardonnay together. The most famous producer is probably Jean-Baptiste Geoffroy from Champagne Rosé Geoffroy, who is doing two kind of maceration rosé. His rosé de saignée regular, and then a wine with 50-50. I heard of a few other people, you know, maybe they can use 10%, but like a lot of Chardonnay. I think going beyond 50% would be a lot, but you know, we are ready to play. Charlene, there is a question about Rosé Grand Cendré 2004.
Thank you for keeping track because I lost it. What is the question? Oh, so yeah, it would be, it is, no, it is 80% Pinot Noir and 20% Chardonnay. We keep the same blend for every vintage of Grand Cendré in its rosé version.
Scott, this would require another seminar. You know, tannins extractions, it's just too much. You know, it just depends on so many factors, but that's my feeling. Some people might think otherwise, you know, punching and pumping over, but that's my experience.
I think that might be all we have time for today. So thank you everybody for joining us today. Hope you enjoyed the session. I certainly did. Please do complete that feedback poll, which should have come up on your screens now, as it'll help us to improve any of our future sessions. This recording of the session will be emailed to everybody that registered and will be uploaded to our WSET Events Hub on YouTube, so you can catch up on all of our previous events there too. So thank you to Philippe, Frederic and Charlene, and to our partner Comité Champagne for organising this. It's been really fascinating. And to find out about any more of our qualifications, just head to wsetglobal.com and you'll see our Where to Study page there, and you can find your closest course provider. So happy Champagne Day, everybody, and thank you. Hope to see you on a course or another event soon.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Happy
Bye.
Champagne Day.
Don't
Bye.
forget to drink. Yes,
Cheers.
good night. For now.